understands that he is in his master's home village. As the group walks, the protagonist notices that there are many girls around who look like Roxy. Besides, Rowan mentions that the Miggard lived for about 200 years. He also adds that he hasn't seen his daughter in about 20 years, so she must be approximately 44 years old now. Later that night, the group talks with Rokas, who asks them what their plan will be, and Rudyard replies that he plans to take them to their home and protect them with all his being. However, Rokas tells him that this will be difficult for him. Rudyard can't enter cities. Rokas reveals to us Rudyard saved a young girl 10 years ago, too. With kids, he goes blind. If saving them means killing the whole town, he'll do it without a second thought. Years ago, Rokas also mentioned that Rudyard has the goal of clearing the bad reputation of the Super. But the protagonist asks him if it's true that the Super War wiped everyone out. And Rudyard gets angry and mentions that it was all a plan by the demon King Laplace, as the demon betrayed them and gave them cursed spears that possessed their souls. Besides, that war was more than 400 years ago, and Rudyard explains that when they took the spears from Laplace that he gave them, they started to walk away immediately, as everyone began to murder others regardless of who they were, including members of their own family. So Rudyard, as the leader of the Super, plans to recover the reputation they lost. The protagonist feels a bit sad, as he is an empathetic person due to everything he suffered in the past, and he wonders if Rudyard has been alone all this time. Finally, Rudius tells him that he will help him with all his being so he can recover his reputation. The next day, we see the group saying goodbye to Rowan, who is with his wife, Rokari. He says she looks young, but she replies to him she's actually 102 years old. Rowan asks the protagonist to please tell his daughter to come visit them if they see her. He accepts and, like a true Don Juan, asks if he can call him father-in-law. The girl's mother gets excited, but clearly her toxic father says he can't. Afterward, Roxy's parents say goodbye and give him a sword among other things, and then the group continues their journey. The protagonist thinks that if Rudyard will help them from outside the villages, then they will take care of helping from the inside. After a few days, as the group continued, they had to hunt to feed themselves. We can also notice that the sword Roxy's parents gave him is now held by Iris. And after several days of walking, they finally reached some mountains, and Rudyard mentions that behind them is the city of Rikurisu. Immediately, we see the group approach the entrance and manage to see some demons very different from the Miggard Super. Rudyard explains to him that there are different types of demons. Also, the protagonist overhears one of the subjects mention that they've heard someone called Dead End is in the area. Hiro asks Rudyard who he is. He says, "It's me." That's what they call him in some areas out there. And its name means something very similar to running into death. Since Rudyard can't just walk in, the protagonist comes up with an idea. Immediately, we see the group pass the guard without any problems, and upon arriving, they find a gigantic city that leaves them very amazed. After visiting some shops, the group immediately heads to the Adventurers Guild, as Rudius thinks that if they are going to be there for a while, they should earn a lot of money. They immediately arrive and attract everyone's attention. He tells him that he should be afraid of them since a Super is with them. And immediately, Rudyard appears, now with a different hair color. And everyone there thinks it's a joke and starts laughing at that moment. This is because the Super are known for having green hair. So it seems the protagonist's plan worked perfectly. They immediately go to a girl to register as adventurers, and everyone laughs when the group Dead End is called. Afterward, they approach the job board and notice that because they were assigned F rank, they can't take on missions to defeat monsters. A beastman bothers them and tells them they should take the mission to find a lost kitten. So, seeing that they are being harassed, they decide to leave the place. While walking to an inn, the protagonist mentions that everything was a complete success, as everyone thinks that Rudyard belongs to the Miggard demons. Upon arriving, while the protagonist checks them into the inn, we see some demons come to talk to Iris. And since she doesn't understand them, one of them named Kerr takes her by the shoulder. This causes the clasp on the hood that the protagonist had bought for Iris to break at that exact moment. So, a very furious Iris starts to beat up Kerr. Afterward, the hero heals the boy, apologizing since Iris can't speak demon tongue. Kurt takes the opportunity and asks the protagonist if he would like to join their team, and the protagonist refuses since they have their own group. Kurt tells him that he will possibly regret it since they will become famous people. Likewise, the other demons introduce themselves as Bakiro and Goblin. Later that night, the group is in their room and the protagonist is very worried, as they need to make money to live. Immediately, he falls asleep and we are transported back to the human god. And Togami congratulates him for having followed his advice from the other day. So he mentions that he seems to trust Ruyer a lot. He also mentions that he has another piece of advice for him, which is to take the mission of finding the lost kitten, as that will end all his worries. And after saying these words, the protagonist wakes up at this moment, and he thinks that really doing that job won't get them out of the poverty they're in. The protagonist also notices that Iris is awake, and after approaching her, the girl gets worried and asks him if they will return home. The next day, we see the group searching for the kitten. Since with Ruyer's third eye, they can track it. They arrive at the cave, which they find very smelly. They immediately enter the place and realize that it is actually a large panther that they have there, as well as other animals. The guys are interrupted when they feel the presence of several individuals, and immediately several beastmen appear, and they begin to bother the animals, as it seems they are dedicated to stealing creatures. Immediately, the group comes out and manages to neutralize them, and when the protagonist approached one of them to talk, he punches the protagonist. This causes Ruyer to get angry and end up cutting off the demon's head. The protagonist tells him that he shouldn't do any of this, as it will only worsen the Supert's reputation, so he clearly asks him not to kill anyone else, and that he will take care of everything. The individuals explain that they will steal the creatures to later pretend they found them and get the rewards. And because Ruyer wants to finish them off right then, the protagonist gets between them and asks him about the subject's rank, and they mention that they are D rank. After a moment's thought, Rudius invites them to join his group now. This makes Ruyer furious with the protagonist, and he tells him that he will not work with pet kidnappers. But after a short talk among the three, the protagonist tells him that he can make a lot of money by taking advantage, since if they are D rank, they could take better missions that pay more. So Ruyer has no choice but to accept at that moment. A little later, we see the group outside the guild when suddenly both beastmen come out. One of them mentions that he raised the group's rank to C, as the protagonist had clearly asked him to. He also tells him to take a B rank mission tomorrow, and the protagonist will take an F rank one to be able to exchange it with them, so that way they could get a lot of money fast. Finally, before leaving, the protagonist tells them not to forget to give good publicity to the Dead End group, and threatens them, saying that they will know what happens to them if they refuse. Next, a beastman named Nokopara comes out. He asks if they are bothering the rookies, clearly referring to the protagonist's group, since they refuse to say a word. The man walks off, and the scene cuts back to Azura's kingdom once more. There we spot Roxy arriving, ready to quickly find the hero. But she comes across a place with many injured people and a board full of people who are completely missing. But she is glad to know that neither Rudius nor his family are on that list. We then see that during the following weeks, the protagonist's group carried out many missions. The next morning, we see that they have taken a mission to go find a monster in the petrified forest. Rudius thinks that if he manages to defeat the creature, he will have financial peace of mind for a long time. They immediately arrive at the place, and he realizes that Kurt's group is also there, along with others who are making fun of them, as other individuals think that brats like them won't take their reward. So, in short, he mentions that the first one to find and defeat it will get the reward. They run out of the place, and Ruyer tells the protagonist that they should help the guys. So, after convincing him, Rudius mentions that he will follow them, and they will interfere only if necessary. Then we see an anaconda and other monsters around Kurt's group. Ruyer mentions that they should go immediately, but the protagonist refuses, as the boy's thought is that they need to be in a lot of trouble so that they will be grateful later. So they will go to help him at the last second, and he will use his healing magic if necessary. However, things didn't go as he was thinking, because right at that moment he sees one of Kurt's group literally go flying, split in two. So Ruyer and Iris launch themselves and finish off the creatures. The protagonist stares body and thinks that all of this is his fault, since he held Ruyer and Iris back from helping. Ruger gets mad at the protagonist and backs against the wall there. However, Kurt calms Ruger down and tells him that if his companion is dead, it is their own fault, as it was a risk they took by going on this mission. Finally, Kurt takes the blame for his companion's deaths and adds that it was because of him that they came to this place, and if it hadn't been for them, the three of them would possibly be dead. Later, Kurt and his partner say goodbye to the hero's group, choosing to head back to city. Afterward, the protagonist's group goes up a hill when they suddenly hear several people fighting. Upon arriving at the place, they come across many adventurer corpses and a large, giant red hooded cobra. Ruger mentions that he never expected to encounter a creature of such magnitude, and immediately the group lunges at it, and after combining their attacks, Rudius launches a powerful fire attack that finishes it off. However, they observe that they arrived a little late, as all the knights had already died. A while later, they arrive back at the Adventurers Guild, and we see that Nokoparo was waiting for him. The guy tells him that he managed to get the information from the other guys about what they are doing with the missions, and threatened them, saying that if he tells the Adventurers Guild, they will take away his license. So he bribes him and asks for half of the profits they have made throughout the month. Rudius feels very disappointed, as since they arrived in the city, nothing has gone as they expected. As he searches for a solution, the hero narrates that, whatever it takes, he'll always protect the girl, even if he has to betray Ruger to destroy the entire city. Immediately, we see the sky begin to darken due to the protagonist's anger. Ruger manages to notice this, so he repeatedly pours water on his hair, removing the dye he was wearing and causing Nokopara to realize that he is the one and only dead end. He starts shouting that he is a super and everyone in the place starts running. Ruger approaches and after grabbing him by the neck, threatens him at that moment. He tells him that they will leave the city and that if they arrive at the next one and find out that his license has been suspended, he will come personally to finish him off, and after saying these words, he jumps away and marches out of the place. Immediately, we see that Kurt and his companion are very scared, but the protagonist reminds them that he saved their lives, so they retract and apologize. A while later, Iris and the protagonist leave the city and go to look for Ruger. Upon finding him, the protagonist apologizes to his friend, as he was only thinking about making money and improving Ruger's reputation. But Ruger says it's his fault, as he hadn't understood how much the protagonist had worried about them, and he realized the guy's determination when the protagonist was angry and was willing to finish off Nokopara. Finally, he tells him that he knows the protagonist was willing to protect Iris, and this makes him a warrior. After a short chat, they both laugh at the situation and shake hands as a clear symbol of friendship. The next morning, we see Rudius come to talk to Ruger and realize that he is completely bald. This is because Ruger knows that people are very afraid of his hair. Additionally, the protagonist completes his new look with a beard, which he puts on his forehead to hide the gem he's carrying, so now he can go unnoticed among all the people. After a few months, we see that the group arrived in a large city, which is a very coastal city, as many of the shops in the place are near the beach. In a change of scene, we see a guy named Tallhand arrive with Roxy and another girl named Elinalize. They just arrived at the port where the protagonist himself was. However, even though the protagonist was at the same port, he can't see them as they were behind him in the distance. The protagonist's group talks to a boat owner, as they need to cross the ocean. Still, since Ruger is a demon, they charge him an outrageous amount anyway. The group returns to have lunch while thinking about how they could make money so they can all travel. So they decide to stay there for a while, and while they solve this problem. Later at night, the group is resting when suddenly the protagonist falls asleep. He enters the human god's dream and mentions to him that a year had passed since the last time they saw each other. He also mentions that apparently the last piece of advice he had given him got him into trouble. This is referring to the guys who were kidnapping pets. And Hidogami gives him new advice and asks him to buy food from a street vendor and walk down a dark alley. The protagonist asks him what will happen if he follows his advice, but the god tells him it will be a surprise. The next day, we see Ruger and Iris training on the beach shore. They stop for a few seconds as Rudyard realizes that someone's presence is there. And right away we see it's Roxy, clearly spying on them. Seeing, she quickly ducks away and hides there. She keeps training, and Iris is thrilled after landing a hit on Ruyer. Back with the protagonist. He followed the god's advice and decided to buy food and walk down an alley. Still, the pervy hero overhears someone having real sex, so he keeps walking, grinning to himself, feeling thrilled inside. Also, Roxy ran right past behind his back, without him clearly noticing. Shortly after, the protagonist comes across a person who is begging for food and manages to hear a girl's voice, which mentions that after 300 years she has been able to resurrect. However, she doesn't want to die since she hasn't been able to eat anything in a long time. Rudius immediately realizes that this might be the test Togami told him about, so he gives her food, and we realize that the girl was Kishirika herself. After introducing herself, the protagonist feels pity, thinking she's friendless and delusional, clearly pretending to be the demon empress right now. Still bored, the hero plays along. He kneels before her and welcomes her back warmly. The girl thanks him for saving her life, so she tells the protagonist that she will grant him a wish. He jokes, asking for big money and to conquer half the world, but he's never done it. Says he wants her body. Kishirika thinks that for being so young, he's a real pervert, so she accepts the protagonist's proposal and starts to pull down her pants. He's thrilled, but she quickly backs out right away, apparently saving herself for a future marriage later on. The protagonist then asks what she can offer if she can't give him any of that, and Kishirika tells him that she could give him one of her demon eyes. Immediately we see her lunge at the protagonist and manage to give him one of her demon eyes. Rudius starts seeing double, and the girl immediately leaves the place. The protagonist narrates to us at this instant that at this very moment he managed to obtain the Eye of Foresight. While the protagonist walks through the market, a man tells him to watch where he's going, since due to his new eye, he has to adapt to his vision. Immediately, the protagonist reads some movements and realizes that a clay jar is about to fall on the man standing right there, so he pushes the man so that it doesn't fall on him. Then the woman upstairs apologizes to them. A pitcher nearly fell on them. So here we discover that the protagonist can now see things happen a second before they do. Shortly after, the protagonist arrives at the inn with the others and tells them what happened. And Ruyer mentions that he has never seen the Empress, but he does know her story, as she possesses 12 magic eyes, which allow her to see practically everything. Finally, Rudius says that he will stay a week in the hospital while he gets used to his eye. After a week, the protagonist and Iris arrive at the beach to train, and Rudius mentions that he is clearly getting used to it and that everything has become much simpler. Immediately, Iris lunges at the protagonist, but he manages to guess all her moves, because if he concentrates and uses his magic, he can even read what will happen 2 seconds beforehand. Finally, after reading her moves, he defeats the girl very easily. She admits defeat and offers the hero a handshake, but it's a trap. He sees it coming and counters easily, causing Iris to leave very sad for not being able to beat Rudius. Ruyer congratulates him and tells him that long ago he met a super who also had a demon eye. However, he died before he could master his eye, so having mastered it in a week makes him very, very talented. The protagonist gets excited and asks if he'll be able to win a fight against Ruyer. They try, but as expected, the protagonist ends up defeated by Ruyer. Later that night, Iris is down. Despite trying hard, she still can't ever match Rudius's level. A few hours later, we see both of them in bed, and the protagonist thinks that he shouldn't have been happy about beating Iris. He also thinks that they shouldn't be training, since they need to take Iris home. Later that night, the protagonist sneaks out and runs into Ruyer, who caught him in the act. The protagonist ends up confessing that he plans to sell the staff that Iris gave him. Ruyer scolds him and asks if he knows that he is making an effort to get them to the other side of the sea, even knowing that they are being overcharged to take them. So he asks him to stop trying to do everything alone and accept help from others. Rudius tells him he has no other choice, but Ruyer replies that his pride wouldn't let him sell something so precious to him. He also asks him what Iris would think if she found out that he sold the gift she gave him, so he literally tells him that if he sells the staff, he would end up splitting up the group. So Rudius finally agrees to look for another alternative to get out of there. He immediately realizes that someone is spying on them, and suddenly the man him in the market comes out. The man mentions that he has come to thank him for the other day and introduces himself as Gallus Cleaner. And so the anime ends.